No one in the royal courtyard expected the king's tiger to choose the ugliest Omega alive. Ethan Miller knew that was what they called him, even before the herald opened his silver scroll and announced his name with the kind of careful politeness people used when they were trying not to laugh. The palace courtyard stretched around him like a stage built for humiliation, wide as a football field, paved in white stone that reflected the morning sun until every noble face seemed bright, polished, and cruel. Rows of Omega candidates stood in embroidered silks, their pale anime white skin glowing beneath jeweled veils, their hair brushed smooth, their smiles practiced for a king. Ethan stood at the end of the line in a plain gray coat 2 sizes too large, his hood pulled low, his gloved hands locked around the strap of a worn canvas bag. He had been told not to look up. He had been told not to speak unless spoken to. Most of all, he had been told not to embarrass the small house that had sent him here only because refusing a royal summons would have cost them more than offering up their cursed son. Ethan Miller of House Miller, the herald called, and a ripple moved through the crowd. Not applause, not welcome, but recognition sharpened by gossip. Someone whispered, "That's him." Another voice, sweeter and worse, murmured, "The cursed one." Ethan kept his eyes on the ground. He could see the distorted shadow of his own body stretched across the stone, thin shoulders, bent head, the outline of a boy trying to disappear. But the shadow did not show the face everyone else claimed to see. It never had. In mirrors, in polished windows, in the terrified eyes of servants, Ethan was a mistake wrapped in skin, an Omega made ugly by a curse no healer could name. But on stone, in sunlight, his shadow looked ordinary, almost gentle. High above the courtyard, on a black marble balcony, Alpha King Adrian Blackwood watched the selection without expression. He was dressed in a formal coat the color of midnight, gold thread at his collar, his black hair untouched by the wind, his silver eyes colder than winter glass. Beside him lay Atlas, the royal white tiger, massive and silent, his striped body longer than a dining table, his blue eyes half closed in boredom. Atlas had ignored every candidate brought before him for 10 years. Beautiful Omegas had sung to him, bowed to him, offered silk ribbons and golden toys. He had never moved. Then Ethan's name faded from the air, and Atlas lifted his head. The change was so small that only Adrian noticed it at first. One ear twitched. One great paw pressed against the marble. The tiger's gaze fixed on the hooded Omega at the far end of the courtyard. Adrian's hand stilled on the railing. Below, Ethan felt it before he saw it, a sudden hush rolling over the crowd like the moment before snow begins to fall. He looked up just enough to see the impossible. Atlas had risen. The sacred tiger stepped away from the king, descended the broad palace stairs, and walked straight past the perfect Omegas who had spent their lives preparing for this day. The closer he came, the louder Ethan's heart sounded, until it seemed to fill the entire courtyard. His fingers loosened. The canvas bag slipped from his hand. A small ball of patched blue yarn rolled out across the white stone and stopped at the tiger's feet. Everyone waited for the beast to recoil. Instead, Atlas lowered his enormous head, nudged the yarn ball gently with his nose, and pushed it back to Ethan. Then the royal tiger folded his paws, lay down in front of the most unwanted Omega in the kingdom, and waited, as if asking him to play. For a long, impossible second, Ethan forgot how to breathe. The royal tiger, the sacred guardian of House Blackwood, the creature every noble child had been taught to fear and worship, was lying at his feet with a patched ball of yarn between its paws. The courtyard did not move. Even the banners above the palace gates seemed to hang frozen in the pale morning air. Ethan stared down at the toy, then at Atlas, waiting for the illusion to break, waiting for the tiger to bare his teeth or for someone to laugh and reveal this was another cruel trick arranged for the entertainment of people who had never known hunger, loneliness, or shame. But Atlas only blinked at him with slow blue eyes and nudged the yarn ball closer. Ethan swallowed hard. His gloves creaked as his fingers curled against his palms. "I am sorry," he whispered, so softly he thought no one would hear. "I do not think I am allowed to touch that." A low sound rumbled from Atlas, not a growl, not a warning, but a deep, almost offended huff. The tiger pushed the ball again, and this time it bumped against Ethan's boot. Gasps scattered through the crowd like dropped glass. One of the jeweled omegas near the front covered his mouth with a lace-gloved hand. Another stepped back as if Ethan had become contagious. From the balcony, King Adrian Blackwood had gone completely still. His silver eyes were no longer cold with boredom. They were sharp, focused, and fixed entirely on the hooded boy who looked as if he wanted the ground to open beneath him. Ethan bent slowly, afraid any sudden movement would make the entire courtyard turn against him. The moment his gloved fingers closed around the yarn ball, Atlas's tail swept once across the stone, powerful enough to stir dust in a pale crescent. Ethan looked around, helpless. No instructor had ever taught him what to do when the king's tiger asked to play. No rulebook in his father's house had included a chapter on surviving royal attention. "Throw it," someone called from the back, their voice trembling between fear and disbelief. A few nervous laughs followed, quickly swallowed by silence when Atlas turned his head toward the sound. Ethan's cheeks burned beneath his hood. He lifted the ball only a few inches. "Not far," he murmured. "I am not very good at games." He tossed it gently across the courtyard. It bounced twice on the white stone and rolled to a stop near a fountain shaped like a sleeping lion. Atlas sprang after it with surprising grace, not like a monster, not like a weapon, but like an oversized house cat delighted by the smallest kindness. The sight was so absurd, so tender, that Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Then he remembered where he was. He remembered the hundreds of eyes on him, the nobles measuring his worth, the candidates turning pale with humiliation because the beast that had ignored their beauty had chosen his worn-out toy instead. Atlas returned with the yarn ball carefully held in his mouth. He dropped it at Ethan's feet, then lowered his massive head until his forehead brushed Ethan's knee. A visible shiver passed through the crowd. The herald backed away from his silver scroll. The palace guards exchanged uncertain looks. High above them, Adrian lifted one hand, and every whisper died. His voice carried across the courtyard, smooth and quiet, yet heavy enough to make the air obey. "Bring him inside." Ethan's blood went cold. Atlas pressed closer to him, warm and steady, as if the tiger had already decided no one would take him away. But Ethan understood royal commands well enough. In palaces, being noticed was not the same as being saved. Sometimes it was only the beginning of a more beautiful kind of danger. The guards did not touch Ethan, though several looked as if they wanted to place as much distance between themselves and him as possible. They formed a careful path through the courtyard, their polished boots striking the white stone in perfect rhythm, while Atlas walked at Ethan's side like a living wall of white fur and quiet warning. Every few steps, Ethan expected someone to stop them, to accuse him of trickery, to announce that a mistake had been made, and send him back to the end of the line where unwanted things belonged. No one did. The palace doors opened before him, taller than any church door he had ever seen, carved with blackwood trees, crowned wolves, and the image of a tiger with a star between its eyes. Ethan crossed the threshold and felt the air change at once. Outside, the sun had been bright and sharp. Inside, the palace was cool, silent, and enormous, its marble halls stretching farther than a city block, its ceiling painted with old kings who seemed to look down at him in judgment. Atlas paused beside a long mirror framed in gold. Ethan tried not to look. He hated mirrors more than insults. Insults ended when people ran out of breath. Mirrors kept speaking forever. But the mirror caught him anyway, and there it was, the shape the curse gave the world. A face people flinched from, features twisted by an invisible hand, skin pale in the wrong way, eyes that looked too tired to belong to someone only 20 years old. Ethan lowered his gaze so quickly his neck hurt. Atlas made a soft rumbling sound and bumped his shoulder against Ethan's side, nearly knocking him off balance. "I know," Ethan whispered. "I should not look." The tiger huffed again, as if that had not been what he meant at all. They were taken to a private receiving room with dark blue walls, tall windows, and a round table set beneath a chandelier of crystal stars. It was not a prison, but Ethan knew that beautiful rooms could hold people just as tightly as iron bars. A servant placed tea on the table, then left without meeting his eyes. Atlas settled by the door, blocking half of it with his massive body. Ethan remained standing, hands folded, hood low, waiting for judgment. When King Adrian entered, the room seemed to become smaller around him. He had removed his ceremonial gloves, and without the distance of the balcony, Ethan could see the fine details of him. The calm line of his mouth, the silver of his eyes, the black signet ring on his right hand, the controlled stillness of an alpha raised to never reveal surprise. "Ethan Miller," Adrian said. Ethan bowed so fast the room tilted. "Your Majesty, look at me." The command was quiet, but it landed heavily in Ethan's chest. He forced himself to raise his head only enough to see the king's collar. "I asked you to look at me." Ethan's fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. "People regret it when I do." For the first time, Adrian said nothing. The silence was worse than anger. It made Ethan think of every healer who had stepped back from him, every teacher who had stopped using his name, every family dinner where a screen had been placed between his chair and the rest of the table. "I did not enchant your tiger," Ethan said, the words spilling out before fear could stop them. "I do not know royal magic. I do not know any magic. I was brought here because my family received the summons, and they thought if they sent me, at least the household would be seen obeying the crown. I was not meant to be chosen. I was not meant to be noticed." Adrian's gaze sharpened. Why would they believe that? Ethan laughed once. Small and empty. "Because no one chooses a cursed Omega." The chandelier lights flickered. Not from wind. Not from failing oil. From something under Ethan's collar, where the old mark on his collarbone began to burn with a thin gold heat. He pressed a hand over it too late. Adrian saw. Across the room, Atlas lifted his head, blue eyes suddenly bright. The king took one step closer, and Ethan stepped back. The gold light faded at once, hiding itself beneath cloth and skin like a secret afraid of being found. Adrian's voice lowered. "Who placed that mark on you?" Ethan looked at him then, truly looked, and for one dangerous second, the fear in his pale blue eyes was stronger than the curse on his face. "I was hoping," he whispered, "that you would know." Adrian did not answer right away, and somehow that frightened Ethan more than a threat would have. The king stood in front of him with the stillness of a portrait, his silver eyes fixed on the place where the gold light had vanished beneath Ethan's collar. Outside the tall windows, the palace gardens glowed under the afternoon sun, all trimmed hedges and white roses, a perfect world that had never made room for someone like him. Inside, the air felt thin enough to break. "Show me," Adrian said. Ethan's hand tightened over his collarbone. "Your Majesty, please. I am not asking because I enjoy your fear." Adrian's voice remained calm, but something colder moved beneath it. "I am asking because Atlas has not chosen anyone in 10 years, and because the mark on your skin reacted inside my house." Ethan looked toward the door. Atlas was still lying there, but his blue eyes were open, watching both of them with patient intelligence. The tiger gave one slow blink, as if telling Ethan that running would not help and hiding would not save him. With shaking fingers, Ethan loosened the top button of his gray coat. He moved the collar of his shirt aside just enough to reveal the mark. It was small at first glance, no larger than a quarter, shaped like a broken star surrounded by curling lines. But as Adrian stepped closer, the edges shimmered with a faint golden glow, like sunlight caught under ice. Adrian's expression changed for less than a second. It was not shock exactly. It was recognition being buried as quickly as it appeared. Ethan saw it anyway. "You have seen it before," he whispered. Adrian's gaze lifted to his face. "Where did you get this?" "I was born with it." "That is not possible." The words were quiet, but they struck harder than any insult from the courtyard. Ethan pulled his collar back into place. "That is what every healer said before they decided I must have been cursed later and my family must have lied." His voice trembled, and he hated himself for it. "I do not remember being different. I only remember people looking at me one day and suddenly wishing they had not." Adrian moved closer, slow enough that Ethan could step away if he wanted. Ethan did, retreating until the back of his knees touched the round table. The teacups rattled softly. Atlas rose. In 2 silent strides, the tiger crossed the room and placed himself between them, not threatening Adrian, not shielding Ethan from him completely, but demanding care from both. Then Atlas turned his great head and pressed his nose against Ethan's hand. Ethan broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just one tear slipping down his cheek before he could stop it. Atlas lifted his muzzle and brushed it away with surprising gentleness. The moment the tiger touched him, the room flashed gold. The curse cracked like glass under sunlight. For one heartbeat, Adrian saw the truth. The twisted illusion vanished, and Ethan stood before him as he really was. Pale anima-white skin warmed by embarrassment, soft brown hair falling into frightened blue eyes, a face not monstrous, not cursed by nature, but heartbreakingly human and unbearably lonely. His scent changed too, not unpleasant, not wrong, but clean and fragile, like rain on clover after a long drought. Adrian forgot the words he had prepared. Ethan saw the king's eyes widen, and hope, dangerous and unfamiliar, opened in his chest. Then the gold light snapped away. The false face returned. The bitter scent of the curse filled the room again. Ethan lowered his head as if the truth had been a crime. Adrian stared at him, no longer with suspicion, but with something far more dangerous to the people who had hidden him. Certainty. Ethan, he said slowly, someone built a lie around you. The tiger's tail swept across the floor once, knocking the blue yarn ball from Ethan's bag. It rolled to Adrian's boot and stopped there, as if even Atlas wanted the king to understand. Adrian bent, picked it up, and held it out to Ethan. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a royal command. And I am going to find out who. By sunset, the palace had already begun to turn against Ethan. It started with whispers slipping beneath doors, soft as dust and twice as difficult to clear away. A servant entered the receiving room to refill the tea, saw Atlas resting his head against Ethan's knee, and nearly dropped the silver tray. 10 minutes later, 2 guards outside the hall were murmuring that the cursed Omega had placed a spell on the royal beast. By the time the bells rang 6, the story had grown teeth. Ethan Miller was no longer a mistake dragged into court for tradition. He was a threat. Adrian knew it before his advisors arrived, because the palace always changed shape when fear found a name. Corridors that had been silent all afternoon filled with careful footsteps. Doors closed too quickly. Courtiers looked away when the king passed, not from respect, but because they had already chosen what they wanted him not to know. Ethan walked behind Adrian through a long gallery lined with blue fire lamps, clutching the patched yarn ball in both hands while Atlas padded beside him. He had not asked where they were going. People like Ethan learned early that questions could sound like rebellion in the wrong room. At the end of the gallery waited the royal council, 12 nobles in black formal coats, their faces smooth with practiced concern. At their center stood Victor Langley, the most admired Omega candidate in the courtyard, dressed in ivory silk, his blonde hair shining like something painted for a cathedral ceiling. His eyes landed on Ethan with a sweetness so polished it felt poisonous. "Your Majesty," Victor said, bowing. "We beg your patience. None of us wishes to insult your judgment. But the safety of the palace must come first." Adrian did not look impressed. "Say what you mean." An older councilman cleared his throat. "The creature has behaved in an unprecedented manner. The Miller boy carries an unknown mark. Several witnesses report abnormal light around him. Until the court mages can determine whether he has influenced Atlas, he should be secured." Ethan's fingers tightened around the yarn ball. Secured was a palace word. It sounded clean. It meant locked away. Victor lowered his eyes in a display of sorrow that did not reach his mouth. "I only worry for the king. Atlas has always rejected false things. If he chose that boy, then either the boy is not what he appears to be, or the beast has been deceived." The sentence moved through the council like a match held to dry paper. Not what he appears to be. Deceived. Dangerous. Ethan felt each word settle on his skin, adding weight to a curse he already carried everywhere. Adrian turned slightly, enough that Ethan could see the side of his face. "You want him examined." "Temporarily housed in the North Tower," the councilman said. "For one night. No harm. Only precaution." Ethan looked through the tall window beyond them. The North Tower rose at the far corner of the palace grounds, thin and pale against the evening sky, with windows too narrow for a person to climb through. It was beautiful from a distance, which made it worse. "I will go," Ethan said quietly. Adrian's eyes cut to him. No, the word was immediate, too sharp for the polished room. Ethan forced himself to lift his chin. "If I refuse, they will say I am guilty. If I stay beside you, they will say I tricked you. If I run, they will say I was always a monster." His voice softened. "I know how this works, Your Majesty." Something unreadable passed across Adrian's face. Atlas made a low sound, unhappy and deep, and pressed his shoulder against Ethan until Ethan nearly stumbled. Victor smiled faintly, just enough for Ethan to see. The king saw it too. But before Adrian could speak, the oldest councilwoman stepped forward with a sealed order in her hands, the black wax stamped with the symbol of the Queen Mother. Her Majesty requests the Omega be held until morning. Silence fell. Even Adrian did not move for a moment. Ethan understood then that this was not only about him. This was about how much of his own palace the king truly controlled. So he handed the yarn ball to Atlas, touched the tiger's fur once in farewell, and walked toward the guards before anyone could drag him there. Behind him, Adrian's voice followed, cold enough to frost the marble. Place him in the tower if you must. But hear me clearly. No one enters that room without my permission. Victor's smile vanished. Atlas carried the yarn ball in his mouth and followed Ethan all the way to the tower door. The North Tower room was warmer than Ethan expected, which somehow made it feel less like mercy and more like a mistake someone intended to correct later. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a small fireplace glowed behind a brass screen, and a single window looked out over the palace gardens, now silver under the rising moon. Atlas remained outside the door, too large to enter comfortably, his white body stretched across the hallway like a living lock. Every time a guard shifted too close, the tiger lifted his head, and the guard remembered something urgent on the other side of the corridor. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed with his hands folded in his lap, listening to the palace breathe around him. He told himself he had survived worse rooms. Smaller rooms. Colder rooms. Rooms where family members discussed him in the hallway, as if he were a broken chair they could not decide whether to repair or throw away. Yet this room felt different because, for one impossible afternoon, someone had seen through the lie. Adrian had seen him. Not completely, not long enough to trust, but long enough to know Ethan was not what the curse made him appear to be. That single second had become a dangerous little flame inside his chest. He was still staring at the moon when the lock clicked. Ethan stood at once. The door opened, and Adrian entered with 3 court mages behind him, their robes embroidered with silver thread. Victor Langley followed at a careful distance, along with 2 council members and the Queen Mother herself, a tall woman in pearl gray silk whose face held the perfect calm of a winter lake. Atlas rose with a rumble that made the candle flames lean sideways. Adrian lifted one hand. "They enter because I allow it," he said, never looking away from Ethan. "No one touches him." The oldest mage bowed. "The examination requires only a mirror, a light charm, and a drop of willing blood." Ethan went still. Adrian's gaze sharpened. "Willing," he repeated. The mage paled. "Of course, Your Majesty." Ethan could have refused. He knew that. But refusal would follow him forever, reshaped by others into guilt. So he stepped forward and held out his hand. "It is all right," he said, though nothing felt all right. The mage pricked Ethan's fingertip with a silver lancet, so small it looked like a sewing needle. A single red bead appeared. It fell onto a round mirror placed on the table. For a moment, nothing happened. Victor exhaled softly, almost amused. Then the mirror filled with gold. Light spread from the single drop, like sunrise moving across water. The room vanished from its surface, replaced by an image of Ethan standing beneath a blackwood tree in bloom, his face clear, gentle, and untouched by the curse. His brown hair lifted in a wind no one else could feel. His pale blue eyes shone with tears he had not yet cried. And at his collarbone, the broken star opened into a full royal seal, the ancient crest of a lost branch of House Blackwood. The Queen Mother took one step back. The council members went silent. Victor's polished expression cracked. Atlas lowered his head until his forehead touched the floor. The court mages dropped to their knees as if their bodies had remembered a law their minds had forgotten. Ethan stared at the mirror, unable to move, unable to understand the beautiful stranger looking back at him. Adrian stood beside him, his face carved from shock and fury held under perfect control. "That is not a curse mark," the oldest mage whispered. "That is a blood seal." Ethan looked at Adrian. "What does that mean?" Adrian's voice was quiet, but every person in the room heard it. "It means someone did not hide you because you were unwanted. They hid you because you could be claimed." The mirror flashed once more, and beneath the royal seal, words appeared in old gold script. "The true heir returns when the tiger kneels." The words in the mirror did not fade. They remained there, burning in old gold light, turning the quiet tower room into a place where every breath sounded guilty. The true heir returns when the tiger kneels. Ethan read the sentence again and again, waiting for it to become less impossible, waiting for someone to laugh and explain that royal mirrors made mistakes, that ancient magic sometimes confused lonely boys for people who mattered. No one laughed. The Queen Mother's face had gone so pale, it almost matched the pearls at her throat. Victor Langley looked at the floor, but not quickly enough to hide the fear in his eyes. Adrian saw everything. He always did. Everyone leaves except Ethan, he said. The oldest mage bowed, so low his sleeves brushed the rug. Your Majesty, the seal must be recorded before any decision is made. The seal has already been recorded by every person who had the misfortune of seeing it before I understood who arranged this little examination. Adrian's voice was quiet, but it moved through the room like a door closing forever. Leave. The council members obeyed first, their polished shoes whispering toward the hall. The mages followed, carrying the mirror between them as if it had become too heavy to hold. Victor hesitated at the threshold. Atlas lifted his head. Victor left. Only the Queen Mother remained, her hands folded neatly before her. Her expression returned to perfect calm. Adrian, she said, using his name like a warning wrapped in silk. You are standing at the edge of a story older than you are. Adrian turned to her. Then tell it correctly. For the first time since Ethan had entered the palace, the Queen Mother looked directly at him without disgust. That was almost worse. Her gaze was not cruel. It was measuring. There was once another branch of House Blackwood, she said. A quiet line, distant from the throne, but beloved by the old magic. Their heir was said to carry a star seal and the favor of the guardian beast. When your father became king, that branch vanished from court records. Ethan's hands went cold. Vanished. Sent away, she said. Hidden. Protected, some claimed. Removed, others whispered. Adrian's jaw tightened. My father stole the succession. The Queen Mother did not answer. She did not need to. The silence was a confession dressed as dignity. Ethan stepped back until the bed frame touched his legs. No, that cannot be about me. I am Ethan Miller. My father keeps ledgers for a failing estate. My mother cannot even look at me during breakfast. I am not royal. I am not anything. Atlas moved into the room then, squeezing his massive body through the doorway with impossible care. He crossed to Ethan, lowered his head, and placed the patched blue yarn ball at his feet. The gesture was so simple that Ethan almost broke apart from it. The tiger had not brought him a crown. He had brought him the only thing Ethan owned that had never judged him. Adrian looked at the ball, then at Ethan, and understanding passed over his face like sunrise over snow. Atlas was not testing your blood first, he said softly. He was testing your heart. The Queen Mother's calm finally cracked. This cannot leave the tower. Adrian's eyes hardened. It already has. From outside the door came the sound of hurried footsteps, then a guard's voice, strained with panic. Your Majesty, forgive me, but the court is gathering in the Eastern Hall. Lord Langley is claiming the cursed Omega forged the mirror vision. Ethan closed his eyes. Of course. The truth had barely learned to stand before someone tried to bury it again. Adrian moved to the window and looked across the moonlit gardens toward the glowing eastern wing. Victor moved quickly. The Queen Mother whispered, because he knows what the rest of them know. If the court accepts Ethan, every alliance built on the old lie begins to collapse. Ethan opened his eyes. Then send me away. Adrian turned. No, I can disappear again. I am good at that. His voice shook, but he forced the words out. You have a kingdom. I am not worth tearing it apart. For a moment, Adrian simply looked at him, and the cold king from the balcony seemed very far away. That is the lie they taught you best, he said. Then he held out his hand, not as a command, but as a choice. Come with me, Ethan. Let them see who they tried to erase. Atlas stepped behind Ethan, warm and steady as a promise. In the hallway beyond, the palace waited with all its beautiful teeth. Ethan stared at Adrian's open hand, then at the yarn ball by his feet, then at the tiger who had chosen him when no one else would. Slowly, trembling, he picked up the ball with one hand and placed the other in the king's palm. The walk from the North Tower to the Eastern Hall felt longer than any road Ethan had ever taken. The palace corridors stretched before him in polished black marble and gold, reflecting his hooded figure again and again until it looked as if 100 frightened versions of him were being led toward judgment. Adrian did not drag him. He did not tighten his grip or force Ethan to match his pace. He simply walked beside him with his hand open around Ethan's, steady enough that Ethan could borrow courage from the warmth of it without understanding why it was being offered. Atlas followed so close behind them that the white fur of his chest brushed Ethan's back whenever he slowed. Servants flattened themselves against the walls. Guards bowed too quickly. By the time they reached the bronze doors of the Eastern Hall, the rumors had already arrived before them. Ethan heard his name through the metal, twisted into something ugly by frightened voices. Fraud. Spellcaster. Imposter. Adrian paused with one hand on the door. You do not have to speak unless you want to. Ethan looked down at the patched blue yarn ball tucked against his chest. They have been speaking for me my whole life. Adrian's silver eyes softened by a fraction. Then tonight, they listen. The doors opened. The Eastern Hall blazed with chandelier light, filled from wall to wall with nobles, council members, court officials, and every Omega candidate from the selection. At the far end, beneath a stained glass window of the first Blackwood king, Victor Langley stood as if he had been born there, perfect in ivory silk, surrounded by supporters who looked relieved to have someone beautiful to believe. When Ethan entered, the hall recoiled without moving. 100 polite faces tightening at once. Victor bowed to Adrian, then turned his sorrowful eyes toward the crowd. Your Majesty, we all understand your compassion. But compassion cannot replace law. This boy appeared today under suspicious circumstances. He carries a mark no one can verify. The mirror vision was uncontrolled, and the guardian beast has behaved in a way that endangers centuries of tradition. Ethan expected Adrian to answer from the throne. Instead, the king walked to the center of the hall and brought Ethan with him. The attention burned worse than sunlight. Ethan felt the curse crawling over his face, working harder under so many eyes, making him seem smaller, stranger, easier to hate. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate while ensuring everyone could hear. If he truly has nothing to hide, let him remove the hood. The hall went silent. Ethan's breath caught. Adrian turned toward him, and for a terrible moment, Ethan feared even this kindness had a limit. But the king did not reach for the hood. He only said, that choice is his. Something inside Ethan trembled. No one had ever made his face his own before. Slowly, with both hands shaking, he pushed the hood back. The hall reacted at once. Sharp inhales, a few whispers, one stifled laugh quickly disguised as a cough. Ethan forced himself not to lower his head. He stood there with the false face they feared and the true heart they had never bothered to see. Victor smiled. There is your answer. Adrian's voice cut through the room, low and absolute. No, there is yours. He stepped in front of Ethan, not to hide him, but to stand with him. You look at him and see what a curse wants you to see. Atlas looked at him and saw what none of you were brave enough to question. The Queen Mother rose from her seat. Adrian, do not turn this into a public fracture. It was fractured before I was born, Adrian said. My father built a throne on silence. This court dressed that silence in law. And today, an Omega who was hidden, shamed, and discarded walked into my courtyard carrying the seal this family tried to bury. A councilman called out, the kingdom cannot accept an unverified heir. Adrian drew the black signet ring from his finger. The room stilled as if every candle had stopped flickering. Then the kingdom can start by accepting my word. He placed the ring in Ethan's palm. It was heavy, warm from Adrian's skin, and impossible. I do not choose a lie because it is convenient. I do not choose a court that demands cruelty and calls it order. I choose the truth standing beside me. Atlas moved forward then, silent and majestic, until he stood before Ethan in the center of the hall. The tiger lowered himself to the floor, not playfully this time, not like a pet asking for a game, but with ancient dignity. The moment his forehead touched the marble at Ethan's feet, the stained glass window above them erupted in gold light. The curse on Ethan's face cracked wide enough for the entire court to glimpse blue eyes, soft brown hair, and a beauty made heartbreaking by years of loneliness. Gasps filled the hall. Victor stumbled back. Ethan looked at Adrian, shaking, terrified, alive. Adrian closed Ethan's fingers around the ring and said, "Let them see you." For the first time in Ethan's life, the world looked back and did not know what to do with the truth. Gold light poured from the stained glass window and washed across the eastern hall, turning polished marble into a river of sunrise. The curse fought to hold its shape over Ethan's face, twisting and tightening like a mask afraid of being removed. But Atlas remained bowed at his feet, and Adrian's signet ring burned warm in his palm. Ethan felt the mark beneath his collar open like a flower made of fire. It did not hurt. That was the strangest part. All his life, the curse had felt like a hand pressing him down, making him smaller, uglier, easier to ignore. This light felt like standing after years of crawling. Victor Langley backed away, his perfect composure falling apart one careful inch at a time. "This is a trick," he said, but his voice no longer sounded sweet. It sounded young, frightened, and far too loud. "That thing is not an heir. He is a mistake wearing borrowed magic." Atlas lifted his head. The room darkened around the edges, not with night, but with attention. The tiger's blue eyes turned toward Victor, and every candle in the hall bent toward him as if listening. Ethan held his breath. Then Atlas spoke. His voice was not loud, yet it filled the hall from floor to ceiling, deep as old stone and clear as a bell under winter stars. "The mistake is not the boy." No one moved. Ethan's fingers tightened around the ring until the Blackwood crest pressed into his skin. Adrian stepped closer to him, not in front this time, but beside him, shoulder to shoulder. The Queen Mother gripped the arm of her chair. "Atlas," she whispered, as if saying the name of a ghost. The tiger rose to his full height, magnificent and calm. "For 100 years, I waited for the child of the hidden branch. I was given silk, gold, and false heirs with pretty smiles. None carried kindness through shame. None carried loneliness without turning cruel. Then he came with a toy made from scraps and a heart that still knew how to be gentle." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but he did not look away. Not this time. The curse cracked again, wider, brighter, and the false bitterness in the air dissolved into the clean scent of rain on clover. People gasped as they saw him truly. Pale anime-white skin warmed by gold light, soft brown hair, blue eyes trembling with disbelief, and the royal star seal shining at his collarbone. He was not frightening. He was not wrong. He was simply Ethan, and somehow that was enough to make an entire court fall silent. Adrian turned to the nobles. "You wanted verification. You have heard the Guardian speak." Victor's face twisted with panic. Guardians can be misled. Atlas's tail swept once across the marble. Only by those who wear a crown over a rotten secret. The words struck the hall like thunder without sound. The Queen Mother closed her eyes. Adrian noticed. So did Ethan. Slowly, the king looked toward her. "What secret?" She opened her eyes, and for the first time, she looked tired instead of royal. "Your father did not act alone." A murmur rose, then vanished when Adrian lifted his hand. The Queen Mother's gaze moved past him, past Ethan, and landed on Victor. The Langley family kept the records. They named the child cursed. They placed him with House Miller. They ensured no one would want him before the tiger could find him. Victor shook his head, but no denial came. Ethan felt the floor sway beneath him. His whole life had not been an accident. It had been arranged. All the closed doors, all the hidden mirrors, all the years of being treated like something shameful had been built by people standing in this very room. Adrian's hand found his, steady and warm. "Look at me," he said softly. Ethan did. "You are not what they made you feel." The final piece of the curse shattered. Gold light burst outward, not harsh, not dangerous, but brilliant enough to make every shadow retreat. Across the hall, nobles lowered their heads one by one, some from fear, some from guilt, a few, perhaps, from understanding. Atlas picked up the patched blue yarn ball and placed it gently in Ethan's hands. "My king," the tiger said, and this time everyone knew he was speaking to Ethan. "Your real enemy has been inside this room from the beginning." Adrian's silver eyes darkened as he looked at Victor, the council, and the trembling court around them. Ethan stood with the ring in one hand and the yarn ball in the other, no longer hidden, no longer unwanted, while the palace that had tried to erase him waited for its first command.